Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we've got a really fascinating mission for you. We are going deep into a stack of sources that frankly challenge some pretty fundamental assumptions about history. We're looking at this profound and I think often overlooked link between two ancient peoples, Turks and Jews.
That's right. I mean, if you just glance at a map or a standard history textbook, you wouldn't necessarily draw a direct line between them.
Not at all.
But these sources argue that they share a kind of foundational architecture. And not just through, casual trade, but deep-seated concepts in philosophy, religion, and even how they organize their societies.
And our job, your job listening, is to pull out those real aha moments, those points of connection that show just how interwoven Eurasian intellectual history actually is.
And to do that, we're going to be looking at the material through a very specific lens the sources bring up. It's a theory called Odam Tili.
Odam Tili.
Which means human language. And the idea isn't just about vocabulary. It suggests that language is the primary vehicle for how we form concepts. So if Turks and Jews share words for things like law or the universe, it points to a shared cognitive structure for, for civilization itself.
So language is a blueprint for the mind. I like that. We're tracing these deep-time connections. And the sources say we should start right at the top with the ultimate concept, the divine. So, okay, let's unpack this. The sources immediately point to this striking similarity in the way both groups talked about God, their monotheistic foundations.
Right.
Long before the major Abrahamic faiths were really established in the region, ancient Turkic belief systems, they centered on a concept called Tangri.
Congri. It's this idea that means both the sky and this sort of universal singular power. It shows a monotheistic worldview was already deeply embedded in the culture.
And this is where it gets really interesting because it wasn't just some abstract parallel. There was tangible exchange. The sources point to the Karaite Jews.
The Karaites, a Jewish sect that historically rejected rabbinical tradition and focused purely on the written Torah. They often had very strong ties with Turkic cultures.
And living among them, they actually adopted the word Tangri to refer to God.
Exactly. And that's not a small thing. It's a direct linguistic and really religious exchange that went on for centuries.
Right.
It shows a huge degree of cultural comfort there.
Wow. And the connection doesn't stop there, right? Because then we have the Jewish name for God, Elohim.
And this is the real kicker. A clear derivative of that word, Elohim, is still in active use today in modern Uzbek.
Still?
Oh, yes. In prayers, in blessings, you can literally hear people say, Elohim, help us, or Elohim, give us strength.
So it's a living echo of that divine name.
It's a living echo, not some dusty historical artifact. And if you put that in the broader context, it becomes really significant. The sources make a big point of this. In the Arab tradition, the term is almost exclusively Allah. But the fact that Turks and Jews both retain these other terms, Tangri or Elohim, it suggests a separate shared spiritual lineage. It's like they were building their spiritual worlds with the same conceptual Lego blocks from a tradition that might even predate the later Islamic influence in the region.
So if that shared language is the blueprint, let's see where it was actually built. The sources say we should turn to tangible evidence, to symbols and architecture, and specifically to Samarkand.
The historic center of learning in Central Asia.
The Ulubeg Madrasa. I mean, it was built in the 15th century, and it's this just grand example of Turkic intellectual history. It's covered in these incredibly precise geometric patterns.
Right.
And what's so striking is how many of those patterns feature designs that look a lot like the six-pointed star, the hexagram, which, we immediately associate with Jewish culture.
And that geometry is powerful. But, we should be careful not to jump to a purely religious conclusion about the star itself in that context. It could be a reflection of advanced Islamic geometry or Turkic aesthetics. But the shared visual language is still there. And the sources point out that you see similar six-pointed forms in Mughal architecture, too. It shows this Turkic design influence traveling huge distances, often into regions where Jewish communities were also settled. The intellectual exchange was clearly happening.
But it goes deeper than just geometry. There's another symbol the sources highlight, the snake, which in a lot of mythologies is a complex figure, but here, in both Turkic and Jewish traditions, it seems to symbolize wisdom, healing, and life.
Precisely, and the madrasa itself proves that. At Ulubeg, the snake motifs are used to represent the pursuit of science and knowledge. The source material draws a direct parallel to the Jewish tree of knowledge, or even the staff of Moses.
So the snake isn't a figure of temptation.
Not at all. It's the symbol of transformative, life-giving knowledge.
So these symbols, the star, the serpent, they're all signposts pointing to the same core value system, the paramount importance of learning and science. The architecture is literally confirming their intellectual connection.
Absolutely. These buildings weren't just monuments to piety, they were monuments to scientific inquiry.
And that reverence for knowledge wasn't just for scholars, right? It was built into their societies. So let's shift to another shared norm, the role of women in leadership.
This is a great example.
We have Sultan Razia. In the 13th century in Delhi, the Turkic Sultan Iltutmish actually appointed his daughter Razia as his successor. He said flat out she was more capable than his sons.
And she was. She ruled effectively. But, and this is the critical part that the sources add, she was eventually overthrown. And the sources argue this was largely due to pressure from Arab-influenced court factions who really pushed for male succession.
So her downfall actually illustrates the erosion of those original Turkic values.
Exactly. The shift away from merit and towards a more rigid patriarchy under outside influence.
And the Jewish parallel here is, of course, Queen Esther. Her whole story, which is still celebrated, is about her political skill, her courage, saving her people. It's a foundational narrative that expects women to have and to use real political agency.
Right. And you have these two examples, a sultanate in Delhi,
Yeah.
a diaspora community in Persia. And in both, the culture not only allows for but relies on powerful female leadership. It really speaks volumes about a shared concept of justice where capability matters most.
This cultural resilience, this adaptability, it also ties into another shared philosophy, one connected to nomadism.
Yes, Turkic nomadism was incredibly sophisticated. It wasn't just survival. It was an efficient system for gathering and spreading knowledge across deserts, mountains, trade routes. That mobility required,
Well, it requires huge adaptability.
and a low investment in permanent things.
Hmm.
Which brings us to this wonderful, tangible parallel the sources make. They contrast the Turkic yurt, this portable, complex structure,
Mm-hmm.
with the Jewish festival of Sukkot,
Sure.
where you build a temporary shelter, a sukkah.
Both traditions have this ritualized practice of building temporary homes connected to nature. It emphasizes movement, resilience, a kind of philosophical detachment from being tied to one place.
So strength comes from mobility. It's a shared pedagogy of resilience. You learn adaptability through ritualized impermanence, a deeply important skill when both groups found themselves on the move so often.
Okay, so let's bring this all back to where we started, language. We need to get into the nuts and bolts of that Odam Tili theory. It argues these linguistic parallels aren't just borrowed words, but evidence of a shared conceptual architecture.
Right. If a theory holds, we should find identical terms for really fundamental abstract ideas. And, well, we do. The density of the parallels is quite striking,
Okay, so let's run through them. Start with a greeting. You have Turkic salom and Hebrew shalom.
both meaning peace, both often accompanied by similar gestures, like bowing, to show respect.
Then you have these big cosmological categories. Time and space. Turkic zaman for time, olam for universe, and in Hebrew.
Zoom in for time, olam for universe. They are virtually identical terms for the fundamental framework of existence. To share those words suggests you organize your reality in the same way.
But the most crucial one, the most abstract, is law. Turkic Torah for law and Hebrew Torah.
Which also means law.
It's the same word.
Sharing a foundational word for law is immense. It implies that the way both groups understood the relationship between divine command, social order, justice, the very bedrock of civilization, was built from the same linguistic unit. It's powerful evidence for the Odam Tili theory.
But we have to be careful here, right? Philology is tricky. When you have civilizations interacting over thousands of years on trade routes, how do you draw a straight line?
And the sources acknowledge that challenge. It's very difficult to distinguish between, say, a direct shared route from some ancient common source or long-term diffusion through trade, or even complex loanword pathways through maybe Persian or Arabic.
So a word could travel from Hebrew to Persian, then to Turkic.
It could. However, the argument here really hinges on the density of these parallels,
Yeah.
especially in those core concepts we just mentioned. Law, peace, the divine, the universe. It's one thing to share a word for a spice you trade. It is another thing entirely to share the word for justice itself. That consistency across those core ideas, it strongly suggests a really deep and long-standing historical interaction. It goes far beyond simple borrowing.
So let's pivot to the final, bigger implications of this. How did this shared heritage play out in global history? The sources draw a really sharp contrast here.
Figure.
They argue that under foreign influence, especially Arab influence in the Middle Ages, Turkic societies experienced a kind of partial assimilation, a loss of some of those core values we talked about. They cite polygamy, for instance, as a cause for these huge dynastic struggles that weakened Turkic states.
It undermined those original meritocratic structures. And on the preservation side, the sources posit that Jewish communities, particularly in the diaspora, acted as custodians of these shared intellectual virtues: justice, knowledge, adaptability. This preservation was key to their long-term survival and made them vital intellectual brokers.
And this role becomes globally significant in one specific year, 1492.
Exactly, 1492. The expulsion of Jews from Spain, the fall of the Andalusian libraries. That event basically unleashed a reservoir of knowledge into Europe. And the sources claim a lot of this systemic knowledge, math, astronomy, philosophy had its roots in that earlier high-level Turkic intellectual tradition.
So that influx of knowledge helps spark the Renaissance.
It was a major catalyst.
Mm.
And the Jewish diaspora, ironically finding refuge in the Ottoman state, a major Turkic power, after being expelled from Spain, they played the key role in transmitting this heritage across continents.
So they weren't just carrying books.
They were carrying systemic knowledge. They helped shape European scientific advancements and later Enlightenment ideas that influenced American democratic ideals. It solidifies this idea that the shared intellectual infrastructure from Samarkand and the steppes, it wasn't just local, it was profoundly global in its reach. The Jewish diaspora was the cultural broker connecting Central Asian antiquity to European modernity.
This has been such a revealing deep dive. We've uncovered this profound shared legacy monotheism, scientific inquiry, gender roles, this deep resilience.
And those persistent echoes, from the symbols on the walls of Samarkand to shared words like Elohim and Elohim, they all powerfully underscore that central idea of Odam Tili theory. The foundations of our cultures and languages might have these surprisingly natural, interconnected origins. We're looking at evidence of a single, interwoven conceptual landscape across Eurasia.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to explore on your own. If shared terminology, like that deep parallel between Elohim and Elohim, points to a common architecture for abstract ideas like justice and order, what other seemingly separate cultures might share an intellectual infrastructure we just haven't recognized yet? It makes you question every historical separation we think we know.